Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is part two of Maximizing Your Relationship with a Professional Photographer. I'm Liza Fisher-Norman, Inspired School Marketer's Master Electrician, and with me is professional photographer Michael Branscom. If you were here with us for part one, you know who we are and about the webinar series, but for those of you who are just joining us, a short intro is in order. On the Inspired website, my partner Rob Norman and I provide free inspiration, education, and information to administrators in private schools who are responsible for marketing and communications. It's our goal to make your job easier. When I'm wearing my other hat, I'm one of the principals of Turnaround Marketing Communications, a branding and marketing firm that specializes in independent schools. If you were with us for part one, you learned about how end use drives strategy. Here in part two, we're talking about selecting the right photographer and writing the RFP. In part three, we'll go into details about the shoot day and how to get the most bang for your buck. With that, I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Michael Branscom, who's a Philadelphia-based photographer and filmmaker with a wealth of experience working with private schools. We've worked together for more than 10 years. Michael knows how to create stunning images that boost a school's brand, and his journalistic style captures moments in time that tell the school's unique story. He is the father of 3 children, and his wife taught at independent schools. Thanks for being here, Michael.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We want you to think carefully when selecting the photographer for your school and writing the RFP. A carefully crafted strategy and approach before doing these two things can result in savings of both time and money, as well as giving you the best photographs for your marketing and communications needs. Some photographers are generalists. They do a little bit of everything. Some are specialists who do studio work like food and product shoots. Some are wedding photographers or fashion photographers, celebrity, aerial, or travel photographers. Others are photojournalists who cover a beat for a newspaper, magazine, or work freelance covering global events. Still others specialize in sports, architecture, or corporate photography. This is why sometimes you get yourself in the weeds by assuming that one photographer can do it all and do it well. Photographers who specialize in education more often than not work in higher ed, but some work in K-12 as well, lucky for us. Within education photographers, there are generalists and specialists. A generalist will be able to shoot everything on campus, including classroom, portraits, sports, and architecture. But unless you're Michael, the generalist may not be equally skilled in all these areas. A photographer that's great at portraits might not be stellar at sports. Why is that? Because photographers can control the environment for portraits and the subject is still. It's the exact opposite for sports, and the photographer may not excel at getting action shots that are focused, compelling, timed perfectly, and make your athletes look fabulous. A school photographer, one that takes student portraits at the beginning of the school year, is not likely to be the right photographer for marketing and communications. These are different skill sets. Now that you're aware of different kinds of photographers, the question is, how do you find the one that's right for your school? Certainly, word of mouth is the very best way. Just be sure you're getting a recommendation from a colleague in education. As alluded to earlier, just because Jane Doe was great at photographing your cousin Danny's wedding doesn't mean she'll be great for your school. Sometimes you might find that a photographer you like is working for a competing school. I'd like to bring Michael in to talk about that. So what do you do if that's the case, Michael?
Well, it is a question that comes up, and I do a lot of work for schools who would consider themselves competitors with one another. And what I say is that every school that I shoot for is unique. Every school is unique. And my job as really a school photojournalist is to tell the story of each school. So as long as I am getting at the essence of what a school is all about, I think that their uniqueness will come through, and the pictures are going to be about the school and about the people there, and they're not going to be about me and a particular style that I'm applying that day.
So how do you find a photographer, Michael?
Well, word of mouth is a great way to find a photographer, but that's not always what you're given. And so one really good online resource is Wonderful Machine. And they are an agency that facilitates the process of finding a photographer. So you can see that you can go onto their website, click on Find Photographers. And the nice thing is you're able to search by not only by specialty, which is enormous that you can just do that and get right into education, but then you can go in and plug in a location. So you can plug in, a metropolitan area, a zip code, however you want to go and search that. And then you're going to see a bunch of photographers come up, and then you can just start looking at websites. Some other good online resources, Case is a good one. You can look at contest winners. You can look at
the Circle of Excellence Awards. They were just announced today, actually. If you go onto the photography heading for the winners, you have to do a little work to figure out who the photographer was sometimes, but that's a good place to look as one place. And then Photo Shelter. If you look here, you'll see that they have a section called Education Photographers, and there are a ton of them. So this is a really awesome find. Websites.
Yeah, and I think I'll just talk a little bit about the importance of websites and how they're really a window into the type of photographer you're going to be getting for your school. It's often your first impression of a photographer and their work is their website, if it's not going to be word of mouth or another resource. And so when you're there, I think there's a few things that should come across right away. First of all, the website should be very easy to navigate, and their style, the photographer's style, I think should be coming across quickly to you. If you're seeing, kind of a hodgepodge of images that don't really seem to be have a consistent look and feel, then this might not be a photographer who's either A, not very good at editing their own work, or B, maybe just not a good photographer that you want shooting for your school. One thing that I like on websites is the ability to scroll by thumbnail, and where you don't have to go into each individual picture, but you can click on a gallery and see a bunch of images right away. The website should be contemporary. It shouldn't be looking like technology that's 5 years old. It should have a fresh look to it, and it should be kind of consistent with some of the better websites that you see out there. And then I kind of think that you should be able to see your school and your kids kind of in their work. I know it's not always so clear, but you should be able to imagine this photographer being able to successfully tell the story of your school by looking at their website.
Yep, for sure.
And you're going to see on Gregory Miller's website here, you see that he's shooting film, video, or motion. It's kind of all the same thing. It's really video in the end. It's moving imagery, short movies about schools. So you're going to see a lot more photographers who start out as still photographers and start doing video work. Usually isn't the other way around. Normally they're not filmmakers that become photographers. And I think that it's important to think about why you're looking for a still photographer. And we're going to talk more about this hopefully in a future webinar if we get to film, talking about film. But if you can think about your film needs and your video needs when you are looking for a still photographer, maybe you want to find somebody who does both. It can add a nice consistent look and feel to your imagery to have the still photos reflect what you do with video as well. Here's a sample website we decided to pull up, Catherine Gamble. And one thing I liked about her work is some of the elements that I talked about earlier that you should be able to see in a website right away, such as a person's style and being able to navigate the site easily. That comes across right away. And you can see that she is sort of a generalist photographer. She has a pretty wide range of clients, from lifestyle to food to portraits. But she does have very strong work in education. And I think that there are big advantages to hiring photographers that have a variety of client bases. Often you can dig into their non-education photos and see how versatile their approach can be to seeing, and their experience in various areas of photography can be a real asset when they bring all that experience into working for your school.
Moving on to writing the RFP, this is where we hope we can save you a lot of time and money and aggravation. So we're going to go over a couple of things that we think are good questions to ask, even if they're not written in the RFP or you ask them in the RFP, at least you get them the questions answered for this. Speed is one of them. How fast does the photographer work? So, in other words, how quickly can they move through the project during the day? So, Michael, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important thing to try to nail down before you hire the photographer is how much do you want to accomplish in a time period? That's really important to figure out before you bring the photographer out so you're on the same page. Because all photographers have different paces of working. So some photographers can walk into a situation and be able to determine within seconds if it's how much time it's going to take to come out with a good picture. If you want to have a certain amount of situations covered in one day, it's important to ask the photographer, well, is this something you can accomplish in one day? So speed is one of those things that really does vary. And I will say generally, and we'll talk about more about this in the next webinar about planning the photo shoot, but generally a half an hour, 20 minutes to a half an hour in a classroom is a nice amount of time to come out with a few really good images.
And then productivity. How much can a school expect from a day's worth of photography?
Well, when we look at quantity of images, it is kind of important to talk about quantity versus quality, but about 400 images in a day in the end is what I normally deliver with my academic work. And I will say that it's going to be hard for you to use 400 different images from that shoot because so many of them are going to be representing the same activity. Mm-hmm. But, you know, there's most likely about 25 to 30 different groups of images reflecting different scenarios from a day's work.
And when we get to this part, but I want everybody to remember that, you know, cost photographers, some photographers are expensive but they're worth it. Many are worth it. And what I always like to tell people is that the entire school is going to clamor for these images once they're out there. So spreading the cost across departments is a really great cost savings. Okay, availability. This doesn't do you any good whatsoever if the photographer is not available when you need him or her. So how do you ensure this photographer might be available to you, Michael?
Well, the best thing to do is to try to book the photographer as far in advance as possible. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's really important, especially in the spring, I'll say, because in the spring, admissions departments, marketing, communications departments are all trying to cram in a lot before the school year ends. Mm-hmm. And so in the fall, you still have most of the year ahead of you. But I would say for spring shooting, you know, try to think in January and February what your needs are going to be. That seems to be the last 3 or 4 years my busiest time of year.
And how about a rain date? We like to talk about that.
Yeah, that's important. I would always ask the photographer if they're willing to put a rain date in their calendar. It can't hurt to ask. Sometimes I'm not able to, but usually I am, and I'm happy to do it. I mean, there's a tremendous advantage for me to be shooting and keeping dry, you know. So I really want to get the best pictures possible. And yes, there's some once in a while a nice picture in the rain works, but you really want to try to get the photographer out, especially if you're doing seasonal photography that you want to convey fall or convey spring, to get them out on a really nice day. A local photographer versus a traveling photographer. Local photographers are probably going to be able to offer a little more flexibility with rain dates.
Okay, so speaking of flexibility, things happen. It's good to know if the photographer is going to get thrown for a loop if something doesn't go the way it's planned, because some people take that kind of thing easier than others. An example of that might be what, Michael?
There's so many times where you run into roadblocks, especially when you're going through a shoot schedule and there's a lot on the schedule and there's certain blocks of time that are set aside for different photos. When you do run across something and you can't shoot, go ahead and have the photographer look for pictures that are happening. There's always pictures happening out there that are unplanned.
Mm.
So maybe that's a good time to just comb the campus and look and see what's going on. Maybe spending more time at a previous shoot where you didn't think you had enough time earlier in the day and just go back to that, or go to your next shoot, next block of time and scheduled event, and maybe get started a little earlier with that one.
And we're going to talk about scheduling and free range versus scheduled shoots in the next webinar. Turnaround time, how long do you need to get the photograph shot and then turn around to give it to the client?
Normally it's about 2 weeks for me to go through all the pictures and choose the ones that we're going to use, and then do minor color corrections to those images and get everything looking usable. Sometimes, we need to go back and do very detailed work to certain images, but about 2 weeks is good. And then I always like to accommodate clients when they want pictures right away. However, the reality of that is that it's much easier for me to give a small selection of images within 2 or 3 days of a shoot than to give the entire unfinished edit, because I think that there's something to be said for editing. It's so important, and so look through hundreds or even thousands of images.
Yeah.
It's sometimes like trying to find a needle in a haystack. It's better to give the photographer some time to get the proper work needed.
Definitely. Speaking of delivery, how about galleries? How do you deliver images? What's the best way to do that?
I deliver almost exclusively via Dropbox. Once the link is created, you can forward that to anybody, and they can go and look at the images. So Dropbox is the way to go.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what about the outtakes? When you talked about editing a second ago, and you get a billion images down to 400, the client might ask you, well, what about all the outtakes?
Mm-hmm. It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, like, do you really want to see everything? You're better seeing a more refined edit. However, sometimes, I've over-edited pictures and not given enough, and then you go through the outtakes and you find a few more.
Yeah, sometimes it might be a situation where there's, I know that person was in that shoot, but that particular frame didn't have that person in it. Wonder if he's got something that has that person in it. So, it's that kind of thing. I know I've asked you for things like that. Quantity, how many? We already talked about that, about 400. Color correction, how color corrected are these, or what's the difference between color corrected and not color corrected?
When I give a school a large quantity of images, I want them to have the luxury of being able to use them right away and not have to come back to me and with every picture that they want to use, and have me color correct it then.
Yeah, that is worth so much, because it happens time and time again that even like 2 or 3 years later, when you're coming back and you're grabbing a photo because it's the right photo for a project you're working on now, you don't want to go back to the photographer then and say, oh, can you color correct this for me? You, Michael, are delivering all color corrected images, and they are color corrected for each image, but they're also very well balanced one to another, so that an indoor photo looks as well color balanced to an outdoor photo. And that's a real skill set also. So horizontal and verticals, I know this came up in the previous webinar. One of the things we want to make sure you remind your photographer about, and it's kind of something that on the ground during the shoot you need to remind him or her about, is that you want not an equal amount of horizontals and verticals, but for every situation you do want to see a horizontal and a vertical for that situation, because you never know where you're going to use it. The cover of a magazine's a vertical. Your website's a horizontal. So make sure you have plenty of those in each situation. And then enough of each situation. Do you have enough of each situation to meet your needs? It's not fair if you don't give the photographer enough time to shoot the situation, and you don't want to end up at the end of the shoot with, oh, well, I only don't have enough of those. So make sure you're really clear about that and ask that question. And RAW versus JPEG, people think they want RAW, but they really don't.
Right. The only time I would give a raw image, or had to give a raw image to a client, is usually to a graphic designer, art director that they're working with. where they need to res up a picture and make it much bigger than its original,
Mm-hmm.
or they want to do some pretty detailed corrections to it, and the raw file has that information in it. The JPEG comes out of the raw file, and it's the last thing that's made. So when the picture's all worked on in Photoshop and everything looks good, it's still in its raw mode, and then you save it as a JPEG. And JPEGs are compressed files, and when you go to save a JPEG, you want to make sure you're not saving it in adding too much compression. It's nice and small, but the problem is you lose a lot of information that way. Right. So that all comes with experience and knowing how to how to make a good JPEG in the end. But JPEGs are really the standard.
So questions to ask, rights restrictions. There is really only one answer here. You want unlimited usage, anytime, anywhere, forever and ever. Corporate photographers might not know that this is the standard in education or nonprofit photography. This is why you shouldn't need to go back and pay for additional use if the photographer gives you unlimited rights. And Michael, you give unlimited rights, but then what happens? Copyright?
Well, copyright's a little different. The copyright of a photograph stays with me. I would be the owner, and I'm granting use to the client, which would be unlimited use. Mm-hmm. So, and then I always say, that I don't intend to use these pictures for any commercial use or stock photography, especially because most of them are going to have kids in them.
Right.
And so
right.
You have to be careful with the photographer, make sure that they aren't intending to use the pictures for other uses. There's a lot of resources out there where photographers can sell their work after a shoot is done, and for other clients that weren't the original clients. So you want to make sure you're on the same page ahead of time with all that.
Except the exception to that is that you yourself can use these photographs for your own self-promotion, like on your website or like in this webinar and that kind of thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's, I do shoots once in a while, and where the client does not want me to use the pictures on my website. Mm-hmm. For different reasons. Yeah. But 90% of the time, that's how I get work, and that's how people understand the kind of work that I do is by seeing pictures from actual jobs. So.
Right. Okay, now we're getting into the nitty gritty. Cost estimates and questions to ask. Okay, Michael, why don't you take it from here?
Okay. In a minute, I'm going to go and we're going to do a side-by-side comparison of some photo estimates from photographers, but just some things to keep in mind before getting your estimate. You're going to see a lot of this terminology on the estimates, so you might want to just know what it all means. So day rate versus hourly. There's advantages to some photographers that can offer hourly rates. You don't have to, as a client, pay for an entire day's work when they're only going to be there for 2 or 3 hours. So you might have a local photographer that you really like to work with. You might want to find one where they can come out for a couple hours and do a shoot. Versus the having to commit to a day rate. A lot of times when I'm doing work out of town and I'm traveling to the job, it's pretty clear that I'm going to be there for 1 day or 2 or 3, and a day rate works just fine. There's a huge value in photographers bringing an assistant, and I think,
yes, I'm going to vote for this one. I'm going to echo this. I'm going to back you up. I have flags raising behind you.
Yes.
It's a small expense to pay to make the photographer super efficient. And photographers I'm jumping right in on you, Michael, because I'm so excited about this, that photographers who have assistants have frequently worked with these assistants for years and years. The assistant can hand the photographer the right lens without the photographer even asking for it. Some assistants can even shoot some other situations that the main photographer is shooting, and the assistant can shoot some simpler things or whatever. But this assistant is well worth whatever price that photographer is charging. So I would strongly encourage you that if the photographer wants to bring an assistant, let him do it.
Yeah, it's normally about 10% of the cost of the entire job, the assistant's rate. So I think you get more than 10% in the end. You get more than 10% more photos, and you get way more than 10% in the quality of the work.
Yep.
So
Sure.
it does add cost, and a lot of times there's a certain number you have to work with. That's okay, and there's ways of hopefully bringing, adjusting the estimate where you don't have to drop the assistant.
Right. And equipment is one of the things that the assistant schleps around for you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you want to make sure when you're getting an estimate that the estimate states that the equipment is included in the overall cost.
Right. Particularly traveling, because when you travel, you might have to rent something that you would have on a local shoot, right, Michael, that you'd bring in your car, but that if you're on an airplane, you can't bring XYZ. And so you need to rent it locally. So that might be an additional cost.
Yeah. And just, it's a lot of times, or you just bring your own equipment and you pay for the extra baggage.
Yep. That too.
You have your gear there, and you're not working with someone else's equipment.
Yep.
And spending time, running to stores. We talked a little bit about local versus national and the advantages to each of those. I have local clients, and I have regional clients, and I have national clients. The cost to travel is obviously brings up the cost of the shoot. And if the photographer is someone that you will do a great job, or they've proven to do a good job in the past, and they're from out of town, frequently that cost of their travel is well worth it in the end.
And I would say in here that if you can afford it at all, to let the photographer who's from out of town do a 2-day shoot versus a 1-day shoot, let him do it, because first day is, you got to get to know the school, the people, what they want, what they don't want, get the lay of land, and you have to ramp up really quickly. And it's good photographers can do that, no question. But the second day, there's kind of finding your stride, and it gets you an opportunity to catch up on some photographs you missed the first day. It also accounts for, any roadblocks that you hit and stuff like that. So and the travel costs are absorbed by the 2 days. So think of it that way. And if you can afford it at all, let the photographer stay there for 2 days on a long distance shoot.
When you have a photographer there for multiple days, it's just more time to get to know a place. It's also, the nice thing is the photographer can then come at night if it's a boarding school. Get some nice building shots, because building shots at night or at dusk, at sunrise,
gorgeous,
are really good for boarding schools, especially because kids are there at those times. At other schools, you're normally not, the kids aren't there at those hours, and it's sometimes a little strange to have shots from those times of day. But it's just a nice advantage of photographers spending a few days there. It's a great opportunity to get some shots at kind of really early in the morning. And
beautiful stuff. So lodging is one of the things that you want to ask about. That's because that's a line item. You might make your business office happy if the photographer takes credit cards. And certainly insurance is a critical part of, you want to make sure the photographer has insurance, liability insurance. And a new thing, Michael, that you're coming up with is?
Oh, yes, background checks, basically. And they vary from state to state. There's really no universal system, which is hard for someone like me because I travel around. But anyway, you want to make sure that you check with your school to see what their policies are with security clearances for any outside vendors. I mean, I generally go through the same security clearances that someone who is doing electrical work or, for a school would do. It's the same idea. It's bringing someone from the outside into the school and what is required behind that. As I mentioned, we were going to talk about 2 estimates. And so here there's an estimate from me. And there's also an estimate from another photographer here. And we looked at his work earlier on this website, Gregory Miller. He was kind enough to give us an estimate for this presentation. And so we have Greg and I have different ways of doing estimates. But the first thing you want to look for in an estimate is the usage. Does it state that you can use the pictures for unlimited purposes? If not, have the photographer do a new estimate that includes that on there, so it's in writing. The other thing is you want to see, okay, are they offering a day rate or are they offering an hourly rate? Does the estimate include all of the expenses that are going to go into the shoot? Are they bringing an assistant? All the stuff that we just talked about should be on the estimate. And then, in the end, you might just be looking at the numbers and comparing. And if they are different, I would say more than 10 or 15% different, just see what the photographers are including. Maybe they are just have different costs, and they just have a different creative fee for their work. But also maybe they're including multiple assistants. Maybe their travel costs look like they're much higher than they should be. Just really take a look at them. And the one really important thing to keep in mind is when you're asking photographers for estimates and you're asking them for multiple photographers, make sure that you're giving each photographer the same information. I can't tell you how many times I do estimates for jobs and there's no chance of the client comparing apples to apples when they see my estimate next to somebody else's because they haven't given us the same information. So one way to start is to figure out what you're hoping to have accomplished at a shoot. Are you hoping to have 10 classrooms covered and 10 different scenarios of, say it's sports, portraits, different aspects to school life. If it's residence life, how much of each of those things are you hoping to get? And ask the photographer, okay, is this something you can accomplish in a day or is it 2 days? Once you establish how long you feel a shoot should take, then you can tell that to each photographer and say, okay, we would like you out for 2 days, and can you give me an estimate for that? One thing I'll point out, so Greg Miller, he says that he has a higher shoot fee than me, his actual day rate or shooting rate, but he includes all travel expenses and doesn't break them out. He does a lot of local work and he does a lot of travel work, and he wanted to streamline his prices so his travel clients basically are paying the same thing as local clients. So, but basically, otherwise, we're pretty similar and we cover about the same things. He goes into a little more detail with some of the costs.
That's why it's a little difficult to compare apples to apples.
Yeah.
But, and you may have a budget and your budget is just your budget and you can't go past it. So.
And then you can always go, if you have a number and the photographer's over it, you can always go back and ask them if they can do it for less.
Yeah.
Maybe they can. And maybe they'll say, I'll do it for less and I won't change a thing. Or maybe they'll say, I'll do it for less, but can I stay for 2 less hours? And you can kind of negotiate so you reach a happy point.
Yeah. Building a long-term relationship with photographers is priceless. Familiarity with the campus, people, culture, your preferences, your pet peeves. This can result in greater work, faster work for less money, but also be aware that there's a downside to this. It can produce a staleness that comes from too much familiarity and not being able to see the school with fresh eyes. So build relationships, just make sure that you're still getting the fresh kind of photographs you did a few years ago. One way to do this is to go back to the galleries that were shot like 2 or 3 or 4 years ago and see if there's a difference in the kinds of photography that you're getting, kind of images you're getting.
Yeah, and I'll just add quickly to that, Liza. Is the photographer should be excited about coming there.
Yeah.
I get busy sometimes. I go through really busy phases, and I have to give myself a little pep rally before I go to school sometimes because it really is exciting. And the photographers have great jobs. They should enjoy what they do. And really always try to find new ways of seeing. And so I think that comes across, especially with longevity, with a photographer that you've worked with for a while. You want to make sure that they're still trying to dig deep and seeing things with fresh eyes is really important.
Chemistry is, you can do all the numbers crunching and all the details of a shoot and make your business office happy and get your insurance and do all that. But do you like the person? Do you think your faculty, staff, and students would like him or her? Sense of humor is really important in this. It's always great to have a sense of humor because, this is not a linear journey on a photo shoot. So having a sense of humor about things is great. And it all goes back to word of mouth. If you've got great chemistry with someone, you can figure that out by what they say about this person as well. And you'll want to work with them. So chemistry is gold. And make sure that you feel that about your photographer. So we've come to the end of part 2, maximizing your experience with a professional photographer. And we invite you to join us for part 3, scheduling the shoot to maximize your investment. We're going to go into a lot of nitty-gritty detail there, things you're probably dying to know. So make sure you join us for part 3, and we'll see you then.